Just one of me is enough. Sucks, I have to have this like really loud. Too loud? Probably not. Learning about the Slavs.
Byzantine Emperor Mavrikios in the late 7th century wrote of them. The nations of the Slavs and the Antes live in the same way and have the same customs. They are both independent, absolutely refusing to be enslaved or governed, least of all in their own lands. They are populous and hardy, bearing readily heat, cold, rain, nakedness, and scarcity of provisions. They are kind and hospitable to travelers in their country, and conduct them safely from one place to another, wherever they wish. If the stranger should suffer some harm because of his host's negligence, the one who first commended him will wage war against that host, regarding vengeance for the stranger as a religious duty. They do not keep those who are in captivity among them in perpetual slavery, as do other nations, but they set a definite period of time for them, and then give them a choice, either, if they so desire, to return to their own homes with a small recompense, or to remain there as free men and friends. They possess an abundance of all sorts of livestock and produce, which they store in heaps, especially common millet and Italian millet. Their women are more sensitive than others in the world. When, for example, their husband dies, many look upon it as their own death, and freely smother themselves, not wanting to continue their lives as widows. They live among nearly impenetrable forests, rivers, lakes, and marshes, and have made the exits from their settlements branch out in many directions, because of the dangers they may face. They bury their most valuable possessions in secret places, keeping nothing unnecessary in sight. They live like bandits, and love to carry out attacks against their enemies in densely wooded, narrow, and steep places. They make effective use of ambushes, sudden attacks, and raids, devising many different methods by night and day. Their experience in crossing rivers surpasses that of all other men, and they are extremely good at spending a lot of time in the water. Often enough, when they are in their own country, and they are caught by surprise and in a tight spot, they dive to the bottom of a body of water. There they take long, hollow reeds they have prepared for such a situation, and hold them in their mouths, the reeds extending to the surface of the water. Lying on their backs on the bottom, they breathe through them and hold out for many hours without anyone suspecting where they are. Considering that the Slavs at this time were still entirely pagan, and were at almost constant war with the Byzantines, such comments from the Byzantine emperor are high praise. Many of their customs appear to correspond to some extent with other European Bronze and Iron Age peoples such as the Celts or Germans. Like other pre-Christian Europeans, however, they also maintained an elite warrior culture. The primary chronicle says, "Just so, even in our own day, the Polovsians maintained the custom of their ancestors in the shedding of blood and in glorifying themselves for such deeds." This warrior aspect of the Slavic culture, in earlier times practiced primarily through raiding and small territorial disputes, would in the 6th century explode across Europe, reshaping the ethnic geography forever. The Slavs had dwelt in the forests of Eastern Europe since the formation of the ethno-linguistic grouping. In the core Slavic region of Belarus, northern Ukraine, eastern Poland, and western Russia, they are some of the oldest in situ peoples of Europe. Those who would become Slavs never went far from home, with the Yamnaya developing on the steppes of Ukraine and Russia, and the corded ware culture developing in part of the forested region in which the Slavs would later emerge. But though they had remained fixed to the forests for thousands of years, they were not to remain in situ forever. Dramatic events were reshaping Eastern Europe around the split between BC and AD, well before the more famous migration period. The archaeologically classified Wielbark culture had replaced the earlier Oksywie culture in northern Poland. They shared a similar material culture to those in southern Scandinavia. They pushed south and east, taking lands of the Purswars culture and extending their territory to the Dniester by the 3rd century, eventually winning power as far as the Black Sea. They were known in their own language as the Guthuda, the Goths. Unlike the earlier Oksywie culture, which burned their dead, as did the pre-Christian Slavs, Wielbark buried their dead, sometimes using monumental barrows, just like the early Anglo-Saxons. These details, gleaned from the archaeology and corroborated by historical events, show a dramatic eastward expansion of Germanic peoples, likely conquering territories inhabited at least partly by Slavic and Baltic tribes. They formed the archaeologically labeled Chernyakov culture in the 4th century and occupied much of western Ukraine to the borders of the Eastern Roman Empire. Starting around 300 AD, there was an increasing pressure that was driving peoples in the east to move west. After 200 years of expanding southeast, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, and many other Germanic groups, began to seek entry into the Roman Empire, causing chaos, ethnic conflict, and war. The Ostrogothic king Ermanaric is said to have subdued all of the Veneti Slavs and brought them under his command, but his dominance was short-lived. By 375, the Huns crashed into European history in a massive way. They were a large grouping of nomadic peoples from the Asian steppe, which had migrated west. They had conquered the Alans north of the Caucasus and were spreading across the steppe lands of Ukraine. Spreading across the steppe lands of Ukraine. When Ermanaric was assassinated, they seized their chance and subdued the disorganized and leaderless Ostrogoths. We are not informed as to where exactly the various Slavic tribes were located during this time, but some must have been dwelling within lands controlled by the Ostrogoths, and would have become the allies or vassals of the Huns.
Okay, I see.
Huns.
That's my other
Procopius,
wife,
writing of the events of the Gothic Wars in the 6th century, says, "But 20 days after the city and harbor of Portus were captured, Martinus and Valerian arrived, bringing with them 1,600 horsemen, the most of whom were Huns and Sclaveni and Ante, who are settled above the Ister River, not far from its banks." It was during the reign of Justinian I that Slavic military power would decisively enter into history, challenging that of Constantinople. It began with skirmishes and raiding of the Roman sites near the Danube. Procopius records, "This Chilbidius was appointed by the emperor in the 4th year of his reign to be general of Thrace, and was assigned to guard the river Ister, being ordered to keep watch so that the barbarians of that region could no longer cross the river, since the Huns and the Antes and the Sclaveni had already made the crossing many times, and done irreparable harm to the Romans." While the situation looked desperate for Constantinople, the Romans were a crafty lot, always ready to use people against each other. In 545, they managed to gain the support of the Antes in exchange for money, and a previously held Roman fortress of Turis, north of the Danube. This resulted in the first recorded significant Slavic political divide. As the Antes were situated on the lower Danube, this helped secure the Byzantine northern border. According to later traditions, such as the Primary Chronicle, and some accounts written by Middle Eastern travelers, the Slavs were once ruled by a single tribe, but there was a dissension and conflict, and all the tribes put up their own kings. There is likely some truth to this, and events like the very visible divide between the Antes and the Sclaveni could have been one such event of many. However, while the Antes may have flustered, they were not able to subdue their cousins, and the Slavenian power continued to grow. Seeing the Romans weakened by their struggle against the Ostrogoths, the Slavenian groups took full advantage. Procopius records a force of 3,000 which crossed the Danube and advanced to the Ebrus, or in Bulgarian Maritsa River, defeating the Byzantine forces in Illyricum and in Thrace, and causing many soldiers to flee for their lives. They took a number of fortified sites through siege in what is now Bulgaria, relying on surrounding fortresses and starving them into submission. They gained thousands of slaves and other valuable plunder. Bolstered by the dramatic victories in their first significant attack on Byzantine territory, the Sclaveni would prepare for something much larger. In the summer of 550, having assembled a massive host, probably in the tens of thousands, they crossed the Danube with plans to march on Thessaloniki. Instead, they ended up in Nisus, modern Nice in what is now Serbia, where they were temporarily checked by Byzantine forces. Though they did not advance on Thessaloniki, the Slavic army perused around Dalmatia, spending the winter in Byzantine lands, pillaging the local population. The next year saw Slavic armies marauding unchecked through the Balkans. Finally, Justinian mustered another army to send against them. They met the Slavic army encamped on a hill near Adrianopolis. the Slavs scored another crushing victory that shattered the newly formed army. After pillaging the region around Constantinople, they returned home, possibly back across the Danube, though very likely many had already begun to settle in nominally Roman lands, from Bulgaria to Slovenia. It was said that the Avars under Kagan Bayan I demanded the surrender of the Slavs and the paying of tribute. The leader of the Slavs at the time, Darentius, replied, "Others do not conquer our lands, we conquer theirs, so it shall always be for us." The Avars and the Byzantines then led a joint campaign against the Slavs, but failed to subdue them. In 581, the Slavs were reported as having led raids all through Thrace and around Thessaloniki, taking numerous towns and forts. In 586, Slavic armies devastated Attica, and even into the western Peloponnese. By 613, the entire Balkans were referred to by Byzantine sources as Slovenia, expressing the dire reality on the ground, which was that the Slavs had overrun nearly the entire Balkan region, including many parts of Greece. Numerous Slavic tribes settled permanently in Greece, as far south as the Peloponnese. It was from these Slavic tribes that the brother saints Cyril and Methodius learned the dialect of the Slavs that lived near Thessaloniki at that time, now known as Old Church Slavonic. Cyril and Methodius themselves created an earlier alphabet called the Glagolitic alphabet, the first alphabet used to transcribe Old Church Slavonic, when they were invited to Greater Moravia in the 10th century. The Avars eventually came to an alliance with the Slavs, and it's believed that they adopted Slavic as a lingua franca for the operation of the Khaganate, as the Slavic population continued to expand rapidly. It was from this period in the late 6th and 7th century that the Balkan Slavs have their particular origins, emerging out of various tribal groups which forced their way into the region, winning lands through spear and blood, all of whom possess very rich and unique origins and histories of their own. Far less details are known about the happenings in the north at this time. The Wends had previously allied with, but also defeated the Avars, as well as fought off various Germanic challenges, and pushed their way westward, dwelling alongside Germans in what is now central and northern Germany. These West Slavs had many tribal affiliations, such as Poles, Slovaks, Silesians, Moravians, Sorbs, and many others, such as Pomeranians, whom the writer of the primary chronicle identifies himself as. The Eastern Slavs spread further northeast, and would have encountered Baltic and Finno.
Slavs in the Balkans, yes. What's in the shop?
It was a summer day on the shores of the Danube River, when three brothers crossed on a raft, seeking a new home. It was time for them to part ways. The blonde brother Zvonimir had decided to go to the sea to find his lover. He exclaimed, "Love isn't for sale, nor can it be bought. Who cannot love should not set off." With that, he set off for Dalmatia. The brown-haired brother, Dusan, was hoping to find a village in the south. He waved and said, "There, far away, far beyond the sea, there is my village and there is my love." And with that, he marched towards Sirmia.
He sounds like a
The black-haired
tourist.
brother, Simeon, headed southwest to find a musician's village. He shouted, "A caval is playing, up and down near the village. I will go to it," and bid his brothers farewell, making for Thrace. This fictional tale represents the descent of the Slavs in the Balkans in the late antique period. Known to the Byzantines as Slaveni, the Slavs' arrival in the Balkan Peninsula forever changed the cultural landscape of southern Europe, resulting in the birth of many ethnicities that make up a prominent part of Europe's cultural tapestry in modern times. But how did it happen? How did the Slavs become the dominant ethnic group in the peninsula that since ancient times has been known as the crossroad of empires? Welcome to our video on the Slavic descent to the Balkans and its world-changing consequences. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us. We couldn't be doing it without your help. Our story begins in the 6th century CE, during the reign of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. It was during this period that tribes considered to be Slavic by modern scholars begin appearing in the writings of Eastern Roman historians like Procopius and Jordanes, who described them as living on the edges of the Eastern Roman Empire in modern Ukraine and Central Europe. These ancient historians claimed these tribes had names like the Antes and the Veneti. Said tribes appeared alongside the nomadic confederation known as the Avars, and were utilized by the Eastern Romans as foederati, or auxiliary allied troops, against more hostile invading tribes from further north. Whoever these people were, they probably began slowly moving into the Balkans during this period. During Justinian's reign, Byzantium reached the zenith of its military power, but after his death, the Eastern Roman Empire fell into crisis. Many Avars and Slavs took advantage of this. Once subject to Byzantine vassalage, they now began to raid and plunder into the rich imperial territories to the south. It is unclear whether the Slavic groups did this in an organized manner or spontaneously, but Byzantine sources mention these raids. In fact, during the Byzantine Sassanid War of 602 to 626 CE, the Avars, who had by then established a powerful Khaganate in Central Europe, used their Slavic allies to besiege the Byzantine city of Thessaloniki and even besiege Constantinople. Some of the Slavic tribes then settled on their own in regions across the Balkans, such as in Bulgaria. These events are widely considered to be the first wave of Slavic migrations into the Balkans. Another wave of Slavic migrations occurred during the 8th century CE, when various tribes exploited the Byzantines' loss of control in the Balkans to settle deeper into the region. As the Byzantines were facing trouble due to the early Islamic expansion, and their northern borders were constantly being raided, the Slavs had an easy time slipping into the peninsula. It is unclear as to whether these migrations caused mass displacement of the pre-Slavic populations, but it seems unlikely that this occurred. Archaeological remains have shown a mixture of Byzantine and foreign styles in pottery, indicating some interaction between ethnic groups. There is also a debate on whether Byzantium kept control of the region of the Balkans at all. Indeed, it is possible that by the 7th century CE, chronic political instability in eastern Rome had caused the empire to lose all control over its Balkan provinces. The arrival of a new dominant ethno-linguistic group in the Balkans resulted in the creation of a new social order in the region, which the ailing Eastern Roman Empire had to acknowledge the reality of and participate in. During the 8th century, Byzantium was still reeling from the crippling blow of losing most of their eastern provinces to the natal Islamic Caliphate, while also dealing with endemic civil wars. So initially they had very little resources to devote to the Slavic incursions into the Balkans. This enables the Slavs to penetrate as far south as the Peloponnese in southern Greece, where some ethnonyms still have Slavonic roots. Byzantine elites were aghast at this, seeing this as an incursion of barbarian peoples into civilized Greek-speaking lands. Eventually, however, the Byzantines bounced back from their geopolitical woes by utilizing a wide toolkit of diplomatic and military strategies. Throughout the 8th century, Byzantium fought many battles and retook many parts of the Balkans from the Slavic tribal confederacies and proto-states like the First Bulgarian Empire. After reconquering these territories, the Byzantines found themselves ruling over a large Slavic population, whose obedience to the imperial throne they ensured through a carrot-and-stick approach. For instance, in the regions of modern-day Montenegro and Croatia, local Slavic elites were allowed to rule over their territories, but only in the presence of Byzantine military garrisons. This combination of military crackdowns and local accommodation helped the Byzantines keep the southern Slavs pacified. However, it became increasingly untenable, as Croatia, Serbia and Bulgaria formed themselves into stronger states. The Byzantines also utilized a tactic that was rather morbid by today's standards: population deportations. Resettlement was a common practice in antique and medieval societies for troublesome populations, and it was used by everyone from the Inca Empire to the ancient Persians. Byzantium was no different, and in order to prevent the Slavic tribes from confederating and rising against them, they transferred Greek populations into Slavic territories, and also moved Slavs out of the Balkans. Some Slavs even ended up in Asia Minor, where they existed for centuries after. These deportations were violent affairs, with many people perishing in the process. Byzantium also had softer measures to control and integrate their Slavic populations, namely to convert them to Christianity and civilize them according to the Byzantine concept. To that end, the Byzantines attempted to baptize pagan Slavic leaders and take their children as hostages to the imperial court, where they could be converted to Christianity. This had varying degrees of success, and during the 7th to 8th century CE, many Slavic tribes appeared to have become at least nominally Christian, although some later lapsed back into paganism. Eventually, the Balkan Slavs would be Christianized, but as we will discuss later, this did not necessarily make them subservient to the Mother Church in Constantinople. In general, we can see that Byzantium utilized various strategies to pacify and rule over the new Slavic communities in their Balkan territories. Let us now discuss one of the most important aspects of the Balkan Slavic settlement by going into more detail about the specific regions of the Balkans they settled in. During the initial waves of migration, the Slavs settled farther than the current borders of the Slavic Balkan nations of today. We have already discussed that even southern Greece was settled by Slavs during this time. However, no Slavic state emerged there, and the people were either deported or assimilated into Hellenism. In the northern Balkans, things were rather different. There, a multitude of Slavonic nations emerged from a collection of very different cultural journeys. One of these journeys begins in the Carpathian Mountains, where a nebulous Slavic tribal confederacy known as the White Croats was said to have lived during late antiquity. With the coming of the Avars, the White Croats appear to have dispersed, but some remnants remained and intermixed in the region of the Carpathians. According to the historian Paul Robert Magochi, these remnants mixed with other local tribes, and centuries later became the basis of the Russins. The Russins are the fourth Eastern Slavic ethnic group, alongside the Russians, Ukrainians and Belarusians, and still exist today. In modern times, the Russin people inhabit the regions of Vojvodina in Serbia, as well as Carpathian regions in Slovakia, Ukraine and Poland. It is said that the Avar incursions pushed many White Croats into the Balkans. Consequently, the modern Croatian people consider these ancient white Croat migrants to be their direct ancestors. But it is far more likely that it was a hodgepodge of tribes, as well as many local Illyrians, Greeks and Latins coexisting. The notion of the Croats may have been utilized as a unifying civic identity by the later Grand Duchy and Kingdom of Croatia, but the region probably remained mixed. Many other Slavs moved to the south in the 7th century and formed the core of the Kingdom of Dikilia and later the Kingdom of Serbia in the 8th to 9th century CE. The former state was likely a mixed territory, where pre-Slavic, local, Byzantine and Slavonic cultures mixed in architecture and practices. In the region of Thrace, the local Slavs came into contact with the wandering Turkic Bulgars in the 7th century, who gave them protection in exchange for vassal status. This synthesis of Slav and Bulgar peoples became the ethnogenesis of the Bulgarian people and the two Bulgarian empires they would forge later in the Middle Ages. We can thus see that the destination of each Slavic tribe greatly influenced their cultural development based on who their neighbors were. These varied destinations show that the early southern Slavs were a diverse bunch. This has led many scholars to raise the question of how the Slavic tribes functioned before they formed kingdoms and states. This is a difficult question to answer, as the sources on the early Sclaveni societies are external, written almost exclusively by Byzantine Greeks, and not the ancient Slavic peoples themselves. Said Greeks have interesting things to say about Slavic society. Procopius, for example, mentions that the early Sclaveni practiced a form of military democracy before coming to the Balkans, but no further evidence exists of this. What Procopius was commenting on was likely a highly decentralized, anarchic clan-based society, which organized itself into stronger wholes when under threat. The Sclaveni appear to have been a quite warlike people, but this perception might have arisen due to the bias of the Byzantine sources describing them. What we do know is that these early Slavic communities were culturally and linguistically diverse, and they likely did not have one unified cultural consciousness. With that said, the many ancient Slavic tribes shared some cultural commonalities, their pagan religion being one of these. Some pre-Christian Slavic deities, like the mysterious god Varachich, appear in the folklore of multiple regions, for example. Other deities, like the equally enigmatic Svetovid, also appear to have been especially revered in multiple southern Slavic societies. When the early Slavs migrated into the Balkans, their cultures and customs intermixed with the pre-existing populations in the region, such as the Illyrians, Thracians, and various Greek and Latin-speaking communities. Later Turkic groups like the Bulgars entered the region, adding another layer to this cultural tapestry. This resulted in the region's Slavic cultures becoming deeply syncretized with non-Slavic customs and beliefs. There are very few details outside of archaeology discussing the pre-Christian southern Slavic societies. However, what little we know shows the Sclaveni as a fascinating cultural phenomenon in the Balkan tapestry of the early medieval period. Eventually, the various early Slavic tribes in the Balkans began to form larger, more centralized polities, which not only broke free from Byzantine overlordship, but stood up to Western threats, like the Frankish Empire and Hungarian Kingdom. Croatia managed to form a duchy and kingdom in the 7th and 10th century CE, which was capable of producing its own Slavonic literature, and was in contact with both the Franks and the Byzantines. Demographically, this Croatian state was inhabited by a mixture of pre-Slavic inhabitants and new Slavic peoples. The Croats oscillated in their religious allegiances between the increasingly divided Rome and Constantinople. During the Great Schism of 1054, when the Catholic and Orthodox churches split permanently, the Croats would end up picking Catholicism. This manifested into a controversy as to whether to use Latin or Slavonic languages in liturgies. Despite these challenges, the duchy-turned-kingdom of Croatia created a sophisticated culture, which merged Slavic, Byzantine, Hungarian, Germanic, and Italian cultural spheres. Eventually, Croatia moved westward in its political orientation, and in the 10th century CE, it was annexed by Catholic Hungary, firmly turning away from Orthodox Eastern Europe and towards Catholic Western Europe. Their cousins in Bosnia, however, were in a much more fluid geopolitical space, managing to build their own quasi-independent Banat-turned-kingdom of Bosnia between the 12th to 14th century CE. This state, while officially Catholic in its state religion, also contained populations of Orthodox Christians and adherents to the mysterious Bosnian Heterodox Church in its domain. The Bosnians retained their independence throughout much of the Middle Ages, forging alliances with their surrounding Albanian and Slavic neighbors. Further south, in the 8th century, the region of Dioclea and its surrounding Slavonic territories morphed into the kingdom and later the empire of Serbia in the 11th to 12th century CE, which embraced Orthodox Christianity and used it to leverage its own position in the Balkan geopolitical scene. The natal Serbian state faced many wars against the Bulgarians in the 800s and was sometimes occupied by them. Bulgaria itself merged its Turkic and Slavic cultural origins to forge its own unique culture. It created two major empires, both of which managed to compete with the regional powerhouse of Byzantium. The first one, built by mighty kings like Krum and Asparuk, managed to control large swathes of the Balkans before converting to Christianity. The second one even tries to compete with Byzantium for dominance over the Balkans, and for a time was quite the regional hegemon. As we can see, each Balkan Slavic state that emerged was quite a formidable enemy to their neighbors, and each developed its own sophisticated high and low culture. The rise of these medieval Slavic states in the Balkans presented significant geopolitical challenges for the former hegemon of the region, the Eastern Romans. With the Greek-speaking empire no longer able to use military means to reclaim its former Balkan territories, it instead utilized its cultural soft power to try to bring the southern Slavic peoples back under its influence. Through the use of Christianization and the spread of the Glagolitic and later Cyrillic alphabets aimed to transliterate the Slavic languages into a writing system based on Greek, the Byzantines formed what scholars have called the Byzantine Commonwealth, or the Byzantine Ideal. This was a network of cultural, diplomatic, and theological connections which was intended to ensure Byzantine control over Eastern Europe. However, conversion to Orthodox Christianity did not guarantee obedience to Eastern Rome. In fact, many South Slavonic states used their newfound Christianization and script to forge their own destiny and make themselves independent actors. For instance, Bulgaria in the 9th century CE used its clergy to establish an Orthodox church independent from the Patriarch in Constantinople, and its emperors like Simeon the Great styled themselves as emperors of the Romans to show they were leaders of the Orthodox world and the true rulers of Byzantium. It was in Bulgaria that the Glagolitic script became the Cyrillic script that many Slavic countries use today. Similarly, in Serbia, scholars like Sava the Illuminator made the Zakono Prevalent a unified legal code and organized the Church of Serbia as an independent force beyond Byzantine control. Other Slavic groups, like the Croats and Bosnians, preferred to have a neutral foreign policy, choosing Catholicism over Orthodox Christianity and finding a balance between the two faiths. The decentralized nature of the Byzantine Commonwealth enabled these states and their populations to be more independent of their stronger neighbors, producing incredible art and architecture like those in Belgrade, making their own theological and literary schools like that in Preslav, or even making imperial claims to challenge the might of Rome. The Balkan Slavic peoples promoted their own interests. In doing so, they produced some of the most incredible high cultures in the medieval Balkans, building societies as fascinating as those of their Illyrian, Dacian and Thracian predecessors, as great as those of their Hungarian, Byzantine and Frankish neighbors, and as enduring of those as their eventually Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian and Venetian conquerors. By the time of the rise of the Byzantine Commonwealth, the Slavonic peoples had been fully settled in the Balkan lands. When they first arrived, they were perceived as uncultured barbarians, but time would prove their Roman detractors wrong. Centuries later, in the High Middle Ages, there were many Slavic populations and many kingdoms, duchies and empires with illustrious civilizations. Influenced by and influencing their neighbors, the Balkan Slavs forged their own places in the tapestry of the Balkans, and the Balkans would not be the same without them. This is nowhere clearer than in the 7 modern Slavic states of the Balkans, which stretch across the peninsula like a bow. If one walks the shores of Budva or Dubrovnik, or goes to the cathedrals and mosques of Sarajevo and Sofia, they will encounter the culmination of over a millennium of Slavic presence in the Balkans. This presence was seeded from the humble steppes of the Slaveni, and was fertilized in lands where Illyrians, Dacians, Thracians and Greeks lived. The flowers that blossomed were the Slavic peoples of the Balkans, very much in place in the frontier gardens of the Balkan Peninsula. More videos on Slavic history are on the way. To ensure you don't miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one. The Silk Roads of Eurasia are the lifeline of the world economy, and also one of the most important routes of cultural exchange in the history of humanity. Consequently, their heartland of Central Asia has always been an iridescent diadem of cultural, economic and religious diversity. Of the many vibrant Central Asian civilizations that rose and fell throughout the ages, one of the most fascinating can be found in what is now eastern Uzbekistan, northern Tajikistan and southern Kyrgyzstan. This region was known historically as Sogdiana, the home of Alexander the Great's wife, Roshana. Sogdiana was one of the central nodes of the Silk Roads, home to both nomads and city dwellers that were the secret behind each heartbeat of Eurasian globalization. The native Sogdians, an Eastern Iranian people related to the Persians, are a storied nation responsible for producing some of the most beautiful art and religious mixture in the ancient world. Who were the Sogdians? What was their secret to dominating the Silk Roads? And how did they come to create such beautiful late antique art? Welcome to our video on the history of the Sogdians, their magnificent culture and their myriad religions. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us. We couldn't be doing it without your help. The region of Sogdiana lies primarily between the Sir Daria and Amu Daria rivers, known to the Greeks as the Jaxartes and Oxus respectively. The region covers most of the anonymous Suks region in northern Tajikistan and is blessed with a lush natural geography characterized by beautiful rivers and fertile green valleys. Other parts of Sogdiana include the regions of Samarkand and Bukhara in modern-day Uzbekistan, two important cities which were once inhabited by Sogdians in the antique period. Sogdiana has been a key location in Eurasian trade for millennia, connecting the prestigious civilizations of China, India, Persia, and the Mediterranean. The Sogdians were an Eastern Iranian people who spoke a language called Sogdian, which was closely related to Scythian. The Sogdians had a complex relationship with their Persian brethren, who sometimes perceived them to be part of the broader Iranian world, but also denigrated them as unruly and untamable upstarts. Sogdia's early history is shrouded in mystery. The region has been inhabited by humans since at least the Stone Age, with archaeological evidence of large settlement sites, like Sarazm, being dated back to the Neolithic period. We are unsure of who the people who lived in settlements like Sarazm were, but it is likely that they were the partial ancestors of the Sogdians and other Iranian groups similar to their relatives in the nearby Bactria Markiana archaeological complex. The land of Sogdiana also appears in various ancient Zoroastrian sources, such as the Vendidad section of the sacred text called the Avesta. There it is mentioned as one of the Arayanam Veja, the 16 good lands that the Zoroastrian god Ahura Mazda created for the Iranian peoples. During the era of classical antiquity, while their Western Persian cousins were forging the mighty Achaemenid Empire, the mixed sedentary and nomadic peoples of Sogdiana grew in number, and the size of their settlements increased. In the 500s BCE, the Shahanshah of the Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus the Great, took over the region and turned it into part of a satrapy, most likely Bactria. As the easternmost frontier of the Achaemenid realm, Sogdia was one of the Persian Empire's most unstable and rebellious territories. Nevertheless, the Sogdians sent troops to aid King Xerxes in his invasions of Greece. However, they revolted during the reign of Artaxerxes II a few decades later and threw off the yoke of their Persian masters. For the next few generations, Sogdiana became an independent region controlled by various local warlords, until their former Achaemenid overlord was smashed by Greece's most ambitious general, Alexander the Great of the Macedonians. The arrival of Alexander the Great brought a difficult time for the Sogdian people at first. As the Greeks marched eastward and encountered more and more unruly terrain and unruly people, they became harsher in their treatment of the locals. Alexander's army committed atrocities as he passed through the mountains of Sogdiana. He faced stiff and stubborn resistance from local Sogdian rulers, including a man known in Greek records as Spitamenes. Some of Alexander's more famous battles were fought against the Sogdians. One of these was the Siege of the Sogdian Rock, in which the Macedonian monarch took his future wife, Roshanak, daughter of the Sogdian noble Oxyates, hostage. Many of the local Sogdians, like the aforementioned Spitamenes, were killed in battle, and the Sogdians eventually submitted to Greek terror. After Alexander pacified Sogdiana, the Greeks utilized a partial accommodation strategy to incorporate the Sogdian people into the Macedonian Empire. As Sogdiana, during this period, appeared to consist of local equestrian chieftains, this meant ensuring some of them had allegiance to him and his generals through marriage alliances. It also meant that he had to ensure these chieftains could feel that their autonomy was maintained. For instance, many local Sogdians were allowed to rule as satraps of the region. Moreover, Alexander married the aforementioned Sogdian noblewoman Roshanak, while Spitamenes' daughter Apama married one of his generals, Seleucus. The death of Alexander resulted in the region coming under the control of one of his generals, Seleucus I Nicator, a Macedonian statesman who utilized a strategy of forming connections with Persian nobles from the former Achaemenid Empire to maintain stability throughout his vast Asian realm. As such, he sent his elder son, Antiochus, whose mother was the Sogdian noblewoman Apama, to rule the so-called northern provinces of the Seleucid realm, which included his maternal homeland of Sogdia. The fact that Seleucus made a half-Sogdian the ruler of Sogdiana speaks of an attempt to pacify the locals. However, we are unsure how connected Antiochus was to his mother's culture and language. Eventually, these northern provinces broke off, when the satrap Theodotos I separated from the Seleucids and founded the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. This is a fascinating topic we also have done a video on, as we have also done one on the successors of the Greeks in Central Asia, the Parthians and the Scythians. As a quick overview, a satrap of the Seleucids called Theodotos broke off from the Seleucids in the 250s BCE, establishing a large kingdom covering Bactria and Sogdiana. This dynasty ruled for about a century and was a major trading nexus, before slowly fragmenting due to both internal revolts and nomadic incursions. During this politically turbulent period, further seeds for Sogdia's future were planted, for new cultural influences from Greece and Persia were injected into the local culture. These seeds would bloom in brilliant cultural development during the later periods of Sogdian history. Sometime in the 1st century BCE, the Indo-Scythian kingdom seized most of Sogdiana and incorporated it into its domains for a very brief period. The Scythian period in Sogdian history is a bit muddled in the historical record, but the Scythians were soon superseded by a more powerful force, the Kushan Empire. The mighty Kushan realm was founded by a tribe of nomads called the Yuezhi, an Indo-European people who likely shared ancestry with the Sogdians. The Yuezhi broke through the Taklamakan Desert in the 1st century CE and thundered southwards, until they founded an empire stretching from Bactria to central India. Sogdia was in the periphery of this empire and was likely under the control of what is called the Kangju Confederacy in Chinese sources. The Kangju appear to have been some sort of quasi-nomadic group with mysterious social organization, with only its chieftains being obvious in archaeological research. This confederacy seems to have been some sort of autonomous vassal of the Kushans, though we have no records from the period discussing the matter in depth. As the Kushans declined, the confederacy became ever more autonomous, before turning into the city-states of the late antique period. The Kushans are traditionally seen as middlemen in Eurasian trade, but in fact they were active producers and agricultural, mercantile and urbanization developers for their empire, according to scholars like Lauren Morris. This economic growth propelled the Sogdians to move into cities and become merchants, getting more in touch with Eurasian trade routes. By the 3rd to 4th century CE, the Kushan Empire began to slowly fragment, before being replaced by the Sassanids, and eventually the White Huns and the Hephthalites. By this time, the Kangju had declined and disintegrated, allowing a tapestry of small Sogdian statelets to seize their independence, such as the Kudas of Bukhara and the Kingdom of Fergana. Although under the suzerainty of rulers like the Hephthalites, these city-states were largely autonomous, and at times completely independent from them. The Sogdians during this period were what the historian Judith Lerner calls influences on the Silk Roads, for they were some of the most important traders of Eurasia. From the 4th to 7th century CE, the Sogdians played this seminal role as traders of the Silk Roads. During this era, the Sogdians were Eurasia's most prestigious middleman, trading silk, jewels and art from India to Tang Dynasty China to Persia to Byzantium. Naturally, the Sogdians grew fabulously wealthy in this trade, and as a result, Sogdian cities like Pajikent, Samarkand and Aksikath became bustling cosmopolises. In these vibrant cultural centers, various Silk Road religions, such as Manichaeism and Buddhism, arrived and were then adopted by the native Sogdians, who then enthusiastically spread these faiths into the four corners of the earth. Let us now take a step out of the flow of time and explore what Sogdian society looks like during its golden age, at the epicenter of the Silk Road. Although many Sogdians had lived nomadic lives in earlier eras, Sogdian society had become largely urbanized in the 4th to 7th centuries AD. This resulted in a highly stratified society, with kings and queens ruling over each city, presiding over a small elite clique of aristocrats and wealthy merchants who controlled the lion's share of the wealth. We know very little about the internal politics of Sogdian cities. What we do know is that the Sogdians were famous for their trade skills and their production of great art, which was used for both religious and secular ends. Sogdian art was a regional hub of vibrancy and colour, as evidenced by their beautiful reliefs. Elaborate and ornate metallurgy was also a major specialty of the Sogdians, building upon centuries of metallurgical tradition in the region with influences from India, Hellenistic Greece, China and Persia. This polyvalency in art is one of the strongest points of Sogdian culture. They were always able to take other influences and forge their own uniquely local and new artistic vogues. The Sogdians had relations in both diplomacy and via expatriate communities with surrounding regions, as we have diplomatic correspondence with China from the 7th century CE. These expatriate communities traded materials, finished goods, and tragically enslaved humans. We also have a rich corpus of Sogdian literature, which was written in a variant of the Aramaic script that was used in the Achaemenid and Parthian empires. As a byproduct of their mercantile skills, the Sogdians seem to have had a relatively high level of literacy for the era. Some Sogdian letters which have survived into the modern era were written by women, an unusual phenomenon in an ancient world otherwise dominated by patriarchal cultures, where the overwhelming majority of educated elites were men. One example of this comes from a 4th century CE expatriate woman called Mune, who was abandoned by her useless trader husband in the Chinese city of Dunhuang. 1,700 years later, the fury Mune feels towards her deadbeat husband is still palpable in her writing. Behold, I am...
Doggo. Wait. Good boy. What do I say? You could sit there right here. A dog on volley pillows.
Who's got problems with who in the Balkans? Explained in about 1 minute. These three, Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, have always had some kind of level of drama with each other, even though they're all basically the same people. And Serbia generally has problems with Albania because of the whole Kosovo thing. North Macedonia has had drama with Greece because of the word Macedonia, which is a whole other thing. And then they also have drama with Bulgaria because Bulgarians believe that Macedonians are just confused Bulgarians. And they also have a little bit of drama with Albania because of the Albanian community that lives in North Macedonia. And that's a whole other thing that takes way too long to explain. Romanians have a little bit of drama with Hungary because of the CK Hungarian community within Transylvania. Nobody really hates Montenegro or Slovenia per se. They just think that Montenegrins are super lazy and that Slovenians are Austrian wannabe sellouts. Pretty much everybody except for Albania and Kosovo and half of Bosnia and Herzegovina hates Turkey. And you could get in trouble for saying this because it would be considered xenophobic, but as an American observing from the outside, and it doesn't really affect me, I can pretty much observe and say that it's pretty freaking obvious that everybody, including the Turks, hates the Roma/Gypsies. Who's got problems with who in the Balkans? Explained in about 1 minute. These three...
Are Polish people closer to Germans or Russian?
What does the average Balkan face reveal about its ancestry? We've compared facial scans.
Slavic peoples.
Yeah,
First
going
off,
back to
I'm
PNG
personally not
face.
Slavic, but I did grow up around a lot of them, and after 10 years of doing this job, I've talked to people from every Slavic country on Earth, so I think I kind of have the gist of it. If you're Slavic, if I get anything wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comments. Anyhow, the Slavic peoples are the largest ethno-linguistic group in all of Europe, more than the Latins and more than the Germanics. And after interacting with them so much, I've observed there are a few general things that they all kind of share in common. Number one, Slavs generally just don't give a and they don't have to cater to every single one of your little feelings. They've been through a lot, and they've seen and heard it all. In fact, the word slave even comes from the word Slav, because historically they were the most enslaved Europeans on Earth. The Vikings, the Romans, even Arabs and North Africans were enslaving Slavs. So it might be wise to avoid getting in a conversation where you try to lecture them about past grievances. Number two, they're all obsessed with soup. I don't know what, like heavy, thick, hearty soups. And also, they can take the most boring-ass vegetable, like a beet or a cabbage, and they know how to cook it like 470,000 different ways. Now, Slavs are generally divided into three separate cultural regions: Eastern, Central or Western Slavs, and South or Balkan Slavs. These are Orthodox Cyrillic writing Slavs, these are more Catholic-y Latin script writing Slavs, and the South is like a cluster of everything, plus there's even a few Muslim Slavs. These are Vodka Slavs, Beer Slavs, Rakia Slavs. Eastern Slavs, Belarusians, Russians, and Ukrainians are kind of like the OG original Slavs, because all Slavs are said to have originated and migrated out of Kievan Rus, which is this general area by the Dnieper River in Eastern Europe. And since many of these areas were under the Mongols and Golden Horde empires, you see a lot more like Eastern steppe folk tradition in their culture. Central or Western Slavs are kind of like the posh Slavs, you know, Czechs, Poles, and Slovaks. You know, they actually had all their papers in order and they joined the EU. You know, like they've always been seen as like the bridge between the East and West. So you're gonna see a lot more Western European influence here, you know, like Baroque and Gothic architecture. And finally, Southern or Balkan Slavs. Let's just say this place is a lot more loud and colorful. This is the most diverse region in the Slavic world with the most subgroups, made up of 7 countries, 6 of which used to be Yugoslavia. You know, like historically this place had a lot more like Mediterranean / Greek / Ottoman influence, so you see that a lot in their cultures. You know, they eat like cevapi and baklava, they borrow a lot of words from Turkish and Greek. But yeah, from my general observations, that's kind of how the Slavic world is. If I get anything wrong, again, correct me in the comments, Slavic.
These photographs were taken by the American...
ところで、君の英霊は判明したのか?
Charlie Chaplin. Or not allowed to use it on
For more than a century, historians, genetic hobbyists, and national narratives have assumed that somewhere in the Balkans there must exist a clear and invisible line, a hard biological frontier separating Greeks from Slavs, formed during the great upheavals of the early medieval period. The logic feels intuitive. If Slavic groups entered the peninsula in large numbers and reshaped languages, cultures, and political realities, then the DNA should reflect that change with equal clarity. Yet when modern genetic data is mapped across the region, that expected border never fully appears. This absence is not a minor technical detail, but a direct challenge to how population change is usually imagined, because instead of a sharp break, what emerges is a gradual gradient in which Greeks, Bulgarians, Macedonians, Albanians, and Romanians overlap genetically in ways that refuse to respect modern linguistic or national boundaries. This is especially striking in Greece, where historical sources confirm a Slavic presence through settlement, raiding, and even periods of local autonomy. Yet the genetic signal still shows strong Southern Balkan and Aegean continuity, with only measurable but limited Slavic input layered on top, rather than a transformation of the population core. That contradiction forces a deeper question. If Slavs were present, why did Greece not cross the same linguistic and genetic threshold as much of the rest of the Balkans? And if Greeks absorbed Slavic ancestry, why did that ancestry never become dominant enough to redefine identity as it did further north? The answer cannot lie in denial or exaggeration, but in recognizing that population movement, language spread, and identity formation operate on different timelines and under different pressures. The absence of a clear Slavic genetic border in Greece is therefore not evidence that nothing happened, but evidence that what happened was selective, uneven, and constrained in ways that older flood narratives never allowed. And it is this paradox, Greece positioned south of the Slavic genetic center, yet never fully outside its influence, that defines the problem this investigation must now confront. Before we continue, thank you for watching this far. It honestly means a lot. I wanted to take just a few seconds to tell you that we now have our own membership community here on the channel. If you enjoy these deep dives into Balkan and Albanian history, if you feel proud seeing our stories told properly, and if you want to support the channel directly, you can join our members by clicking the button below. Members get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes posts, exclusive polls where you help choose future topics. And for the higher tiers, your name even appears at the end of every documentary. It's completely optional, but it helps me invest more time, more research, and bring you even better content. Let's get back to our story. When the genetic data of the Balkans is examined without modern labels, the first assumption to collapse is the idea that language maps cleanly onto ancestry. Populations that speak Slavic languages today do not form a unified biological block, and populations that retained Greek or Romance languages do not sit outside the same genetic continuum. Instead, they cluster along overlapping gradients shaped far more by geography than by speech. This becomes clear when Greeks are compared directly with Bulgarians, Macedonians, Albanians, and Romanians, because all of these groups share substantial layers of pre-Slavic Balkan ancestry inherited from populations that lived in the peninsula long before the early medieval migrations. The difference lies not in presence or absence, but in proportion. Greeks cluster most strongly with Southern Balkan and Aegean populations. Bulgarians and Macedonians show higher but still partial Slavic-associated ancestry. And Albanians and Romanians occupy intermediate positions that reveal continuity beneath later cultural shifts. This pattern exposes the central flaw in the idea of a Slavic demographic wave overwhelming the region, because if such a wave had truly replaced populations wholesale, the genetic distances between Greek-speaking and Slavic-speaking groups would be far sharper than what is actually observed. Instead, the data shows that many Slavic-speaking Balkan populations remain genetically closer to ancient Balkan inhabitants than to Northern or Eastern Slavs, suggesting that what spread most effectively was not people, but language, carried by elite dominance, political realignment, and social restructure, while the underlying population remained largely local. In Greece, this process reached a clear limit, because urban continuity, ecclesiastical authority, and a written administrative tradition anchored Greek identity even as Slavic groups entered and mixed into the population, leaving behind genetic traces without triggering a full linguistic transition. The result is not a contradiction, but a model in which ancestry moves slowly, language moves quickly, and identity adapts selectively, producing a Balkans where genetics reveals continuity beneath change, and where Greece stands not as an untouched enclave, but as a society that absorbed Slavic input without allowing it to redefine its core, which ultimately explains why no clean DNA border ever formed, even where language borders hardened dramatically. To understand why the Slavic presence in Greece and the Southern Balkans never solidified into a permanent ethnic or linguistic transformation, it is necessary to abandon the idea that migration automatically produces dominance, because history repeatedly shows that numbers alone do not determine outcomes when social structure, power, and continuity intervene. The early medieval Balkans were not an empty landscape waiting to be claimed, but a fractured yet persistent world of cities, rural communities, ecclesiastical networks, and administrative traditions that survived, even as imperial control weakened. Slavic groups entered this environment For more than a century, Historians, genetic hobbyists, and national narratives have assumed that somewhere in the Balkans there must exist a clear and invisible line, a hard
Wait, I want to see this.
Hi, I'm just a fat little Asian man, and this is a video that I made. Pretty much just trying to make sense of Asian racism. Honestly, I thought it'd be fun to talk about and just kinda uploaded it without much thought. To my surprise,
Nice,
a lot of
yours.
people watched it, and the comments sparked some interesting conversations and experiences about racism. But there was one topic that consistently popped up in the comments: Balkan racism. And yeah, I wasn't familiar with it at all. If this Balkan racism is anything like, or even bigger than Asian racism, naturally I wanted to learn more about it. The more I researched, the more I felt this sense of deja vu. The mentality of we may hate each other, but are united in our dislike of others, seemed oddly familiar, like a distant cousin. And then it hit me. Asia's most competitive racism server, Southeast Asia. Now, some of you might be thinking, what could the Balkans and Southeast Asia possibly have in common with each other when they're separated by roughly 10,000 kilometers with completely different histories, cultures, and languages? Trying to find meaningful similarities sounds pretty dumb. And okay, yeah, they aren't exactly the same, but you'd be surprised how similar they are. The over-the-top relationship of how everyone manages to both hate and be each other's best friends at the same time. The loudest, longest nationalistic fights about everybody trying to prove how their ancestors civilized everybody else's Neanderthal predecessors. Each region even has countries with similar positions too. Bulgarians and Macedonians fighting is like Malaysians and Indonesians. Nobody cares except for the two parties involved. Slovenia and Singapore just count money while everybody is fighting, while Montenegro and Brunei never get mentioned. The most interesting thing for me is that even with all this fighting inside, they are best friends out of their own regions. Like peak friend groups in Germany consist of at least 3 different Balkaners, and I've seen Thais and Cambodians be best friends in South Korea. So, how did this unique form of racism develop in such different backgrounds of the world? Well, it's because they share a similar history, one filled with diverse ethnic and religious relationships, thousands of wars and historical conflicts that make the Geneva Convention look like my thesis diaper. While the intense racism in both the Balkans and Southeast Asia might be a little heavy for some, don't worry. As someone recently enlightened by both the rich intellectualism of Southeast Asia and the Balkans, let's embark on a journey to understand racism in these regions together, and how racism might actually bring everyone closer to each other. Let's start by introducing the Balkans. Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, Slovenia, and Turkey. Together, they make up the world of Asia and the Balkans. Let's embark on a journey to understand racism in these regions together.
Balkan, monkey, Mongol, thief, Muslim, doesn't exist. Goat fucker. What the fuck? War crimes, Nazi, cockroach, gay, femboy. And then for the C we have Khmer, racist, Vikong, femboy. So they both have femboys. Sleep and lazy. I guess the gopher could also be sleep and lazy. Malaysia. Well, we're doing negative stereotypes. Okay. War crimes. OnlyFans simps. North Thai. Who?
And how racism might actually bring everyone closer to each other. Let's start by introducing the Balkans.
Why is the Polish
Albania,
flag in the
Bosnia and Herzegovina,
in the Asian circle?
Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece.
Hold on.
Let's start by introducing the Balkans. Albania,
Stay away from the goats, Albania. That's Albania. Where's
Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria,
the West.
Croatia, Greece, Kosovo, Montenegro.
Oh yeah, there's the Montenegro. Sleep and lazy.
North Macedonia.
Wrong map, bro. Wait, what map is that? Nor why do you...
Romania, Serbia, Slovenia, and Turkey. Together, they make up the world's most alcoholic family. Like most alcoholics, they're really dysfunctional, as in they fight all the time, but they're also each other's best drinking mates. You might think it's the constant alcoholism that makes the Balkans fight incessantly, but it's actually their history where Balkan racism is made. You see, the Balkans share a rich and complex history that is all crammed in this relatively small region in Europe. As an Asian, I cannot hope to explain this history perfectly. But don't worry, any inaccuracies will be pointed out by Balkaners in the comments. Now, the reason for all this lore in the Balkans is because of its geography. The Balkans are located in southern Europe, sitting on the intersection between Asia and Europe, as well as being surrounded by a couple of seas, making it a mandatory checkpoint for trade and exchange of cultures. Acting as the gateway to Europe or Asia wasn't always just trade and cultures though. It also filled the Balkans with many wars and conflicts. Here's just a few. Greece versus Persia, East and West Rome, the Mongol invasion, Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman Empire, both world wars. Yeah, the Balkans have been through a lot. All this fighting and trade caused a constant movement of people, shaping the region to be the crossroads of many cultures, ethnicities, and religions. All this complex and diverse history makes it difficult even for peak Balkan intellectuals to come to a perfect understanding of their own history. This is why one of the biggest parts of Balkan racism is basically fighting about which country's ancestors came first and spread civilization to the other barbarian cavemen in the rest of the Balkans.
POV, you're Macedonia.
For example, Bulgarians say that they taught everyone how to read, Serbs say they are responsible of bringing Byzantine culture, Turks claim about how food in the Balkans is actually all Turkish, and Greeks talk about how Ataturk is Greek for the millionth time, and the list goes on. Now, a few thousand
if you love Montenegro.
miles around the globe is Southeast Asia, where you can meet.
But you're awake. Really? But you're awake. Oh, did you just wake up? Did that? Yeah, dude. You're not even sleepy. Nationals.
Meet the ASEANs: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and Timor-Leste. They're not as alcoholic as the Balkans, but they're just as dysfunctional. They have a we hate each other equally, so we're the only ones allowed to bully each other dynamic going on as well. Their geography is pretty similar too. Like the Balkans, Southeast Asia is also the intersection that connects huge civilizations together. On land, they're bordered by China and India, while through sea, they act as the maritime gateway between Europe and Asia. Naturally, the region became the center of global trade routes for centuries, also acting as the migration hub in Asia. Many trade-rich countries like the Khmer Empire and the Srivijayan Empire emerged from the mix of cultures, religions, and people from around the world. Of course, getting rich off trade meant that everybody else wanted to control over the region to get rich off themselves. Not only did ancient kingdoms constantly fight each other, China and Indian dynasties, Islamic sultanates, and Europeans constantly took turns dividing, conquering, and redrawing borders. All this chaos made the region extremely diverse. Over several hundred ethnicities and languages live side by side, with all four major religions present. Much like the Balkans, a big part of Southeast Asian racism comes from debating which pristine culture civilized the rest. Vietnam and Cambodia fight about who saved whose country all the time. Filipinos will claim they're the world's most powerful race, while constantly watching some white girls OnlyFans. Laotians hate Uncle Roger because Lao food supremacy, and Timor-Leste is here, somewhere? Now, some of you doubters may be thinking, does that mean the Balkans and Southeast Asians are just confused about their chaotic history?
Yes.
First of all, if they knew English, you might start coughing in 3 days. And secondly, no, it's because both the Balkans and Southeast Asians are very, very nationalistic. Just go on their League of Legends lobbies and you can find out yourself. Nationalism is the biggest reason the Balkans are a big meme in the world today. It could be the same for SEA, but nobody understands their languages, RIP. I've already told you that both the Balkans and Southeast Asia have been through a lot of conflicts due to its location being stuck between massive civilizations. All the chaos from fighting and conquering meant that there was usually multiple empires that controlled different parts of each region. For a ruling empire, categorizing the region into religious or ethnic communities made it much easier to rule over the extremely diverse ethnicities and cultures. For the Balkans, this is especially true during the Ottoman Empire's rule. Before the Ottomans, the Balkans consisted of various empires, kingdoms, and tribal territories with their own political autonomy with overlapping religious and cultural traditions. Simply, this means that divides in the Balkans were mostly which side of the river you drank, and which version of Christianity your ruler told you to believe. When the Ottomans took over the Balkan region, they erased all the pre-existing borders and instead divided them up into arbitrary lines. And we all know what happens when you do that. The Ottomans used religion as a system to rule over others, creating a hierarchy with Muslims at the top, with Christians on the bottom. If you were a Muslim, you got to enjoy benefits in land, courts, and status, while if you're a Christian, you needed to pay more taxes and sacrifice your eldest son to become a unitary killing machine. Every region was then split into religious communities called millets. Each were allowed a little autonomy, but were basically segregated for nearly 500 years. It's not that much different in Southeast Asia too. Remember when I said that the region is home to hundreds of ethnicities and languages? Naturally, that made Southeast Asia a sprawling landscape of kingdoms and sultanates, all fighting each other for influence over trade routes and whose religion is the best. This was all normal. As kingdoms fell and emerged, it became its own kind of ecosystem, an international dynamic. Of course, everything changed when the colonizers attacked, and they did what they do best, blending centuries-old kingdoms and dozens of other ethnicities into arbitrary borders. What ended up happening was, you've had countries where former enemies and rivals were suddenly living in the same neighborhoods. For example, Khmer's, Laos, and Vietnamese, who were each other's rivals for centuries, suddenly had to work side by side in French Indochina. On top of this, many colonizers brought millions of Chinese and Indian laborers into Southeast Asia, creating sudden new socio-ethnic classes on the already chaotic colonies. Another colonizer classic was to favor certain ethnic minorities into colonial elites to fuel resentment and prevent unified resistance. Some examples are, Indian migrants were used as police for the locals and Muslims in British Malaya, or like how the Karen minority was given exclusive military ranks over the Burman majority in Burma. In American terms, this would be like if you colonized Chicago and forcibly made people from LA and New York live as roommates, then brought over British and French as laborers while making Canadians rule over everybody. As colonial powers became weaker though, all the segregation, unequal social structures, and resentment fostered over the years exploded out into nationalist movements. Nationalism was indeed the natural response when your country is being taken over by a foreign force.
The US was being
However,
ruled by
even after their
Canada.
long-awaited independence,
US controls Canada by... Canada controls America by making the US privileged and making all the others.
French as laborers, while making Canadians rule over everybody. As colonial powers became weaker though, all the segregation, unequal social structures, and resentment fostered over the years exploded out into nationalist movements. Nationalism was indeed the natural response when your country is being taken over by a foreign force. However, even after their long-awaited independence, these newly emerging nations went through excruciating post-independence periods, just trying to piece together fragmented countries and systems. What usually ended up happening was just a lot of war, corrupt governments, and inhumane massacres. Most post-colonial governments just went for the true and tried strategy of exploiting ethno-religious divisions to solidify their power, aka making policies that benefit the majority group and nationalism to gain their support. Most of the time, leaders would exploit the us vs them mentality by portraying neighboring countries and minorities as national threats. In Europe, the entire 20th century was just pure chaos, especially for the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire's grip on the Balkan states were loosening, with many states fighting for independence in the Balkan Wars. That independence came at a cost of entire borders being redrawn completely, forcibly relocating entire populations. It didn't help at all that both world wars had completely devastated the region, with mass atrocities committed by fascist puppet states. After all that disaster, the Balkans took a short intermission, where there was a period of peace, united as Yugoslavia by Joseph Tito and communism. After Tito died though, it wouldn't take much for everything to just fall apart again. And surprise surprise, leaders turned to nationalism yet again for power. Only this time, escalated tensions would explode into the Yugoslav Wars. It was more or less a bloody contest to see who could ignore the Geneva Convention the most, with many battles and genocides. All the fighting, dead people, broken homes, and genocide created massive displacement and deep mistrust, splitting up the region even more. It made sense for leaders to integrate nationalism into education, diplomatic, and economic policies, as they were just so widespread in the region. Such policies made it more difficult for reconciliation, and nationalism and racism was more encouraged at the time. The 20th century was also a disaster in SCA, with colonizers changing from European to Japanese back to European in a few years. The post-war was extremely chaotic, as newly independent states struggled to rebuild from the ashes of World War II and decades of colonial rule. It's the same old story. Different groups competed to fill the power vacuum, most used radical ideas of nationalism attempting to stabilize and unite a fragmented country. Malaysia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Cambodia, all of them. With all this instability going around in Southeast Asia, the region became a kind of breeding grounds for Cold War conflicts, where ethnic divisions kind of merged with ideological ones. Addition of major powers as patrons led to local disputes being further amplified. You'd be radicalized too if most of your neighborhood was bombed into the ground, genocides in your next door neighbor, and border skirmishes still going on to this day. Indonesian communist leader Sukarno launched a war in the region because he was convinced that Malaysia was created to kill Indonesia. After his regime failed, Indonesia then spent their time massacring their own ethnic minorities instead. Myanmar went into its own disaster, where Buddhist nationalists led the ethnic cleansing on the Muslim Rohingyas, even to this day. All the complex ethnic tensions built throughout a history of exchange and conflict were heightened through over a century of colonialism. Then, they were radicalized through the post-war independence period,
Let me see
shaping the good old racism in these regions we know today. The crazy, over-the-top, degenerate nationalist
yeah. Live now from Fox. NBC. Japan News. Nihonji Japan. NHK, free. How do we pirate the news? Yo ho ho. Can I rewind? No, it's not rewindable. Which channel is this?
取りまとめを行い、必要な税制改正関連法案を国会に提出することを考えており、その段階で国会での十分な
I can't rewind it.
仕事を転々とし、人間関係などに悩みを抱えていたといいます。
国に対して攻撃の中で会話でもなかなかったし。なんでこんなことするんや。社会に戻るんや。
検察は母親
Looking at the same story.
ムサイズが
最速での昇進となります。
1958.
事故がありました。この事故でキャリアカーを運転していた50代くらいの男性が意識不明の重体です。警察が詳しい事故の原因を調べています。離陸直後の飛行機から火花が飛び散り、滑走路沿いで大規模な火災が発生しました。滑走路に赤い炎が燃え広がっています。 CNN によりますと、アメリカ・ジョージア州の空港で22日、飛行機が離陸した直後に左エンジンが爆発しました。この際、放出された火の粉が滑走路の芝生に引火し、大規模な火災が発生しました。機体には乗客乗員185人が乗っていましたが、怪我人はいませんでした。当局はエンジントラブルと火災の因果関係について調査を進めています。
ミラノ・コルティナオリンピックで史上最多24個のメダルを獲得した日本選手団が先ほど帰国しました。フィギュアスケートペアで史上初の金メダルを獲得した三浦璃来選手、木原龍一選手のりくりゅうペア、女子シングルで銀メダル獲得の坂本花織選手や銅メダルの中井亜美選手らフィギュアスケートの代表選手を先頭に日本選手団が帰国しました。冬季オリンピックでの史上最多24個のメダルを獲得した選手団に駆けつけた多くのファンから声援が送られました。
来ていただきありがとうございます。金メダルと銀メダルを持ち帰ることができて本当に嬉しいです。
オリンピックたくさんの応援いただき本当にありがとうございました。心が折れそうな瞬間も皆様からの応援で2人で戦い抜くことができました。本当にありがとうございました。
人手不足が深刻化する中、三井住友銀行は AI 人工知能が顧客の
Here, I need to translate to Japanese. Oh, here we go. There we go. This one. Let's see what Japan.
メキシコ国防省は22日、中部ハリスコ州に拠点を置く国内最大級の麻薬組織ハリスコ新世代カルテルの最高幹部であるネメシオ・オセゲラ氏が死亡したと発表しました。軍による拘束作戦中に重傷を負い、移送中に死亡したということです。オセゲラ氏をめぐっては、合成麻薬フェンタニルやコカインのアメリカへの密輸に関与したとして、アメリカ政府が1500万ドル、およそ23億円の懸賞金をかけて行方を追っていました。メキシコ国防省は今回の作戦にあたり、アメリカから情報面で支援を受けたということです。
I just want to see this. I actually want to see this.
中米メキシコで麻薬組織のリーダーが軍の作戦によって死亡しました。その後、作戦が実行された地域を中心に暴動が起きています。メキシコ軍は22日、中部ハリスコ州で麻薬組織ハリスコ新世代カルテルのリーダーネメシオ・オセゲラ容疑者を逮捕するための作戦を実行しました。現地メディアなどによりますと、オセゲラ容疑者は重傷を負い、首都メキシコシティへ移送中に死亡したということです。この作戦をきっかけに6州以上で当局に抗議しようとする暴動が起き、車両への放火や高速道路の封鎖などが相次ぎました。メキシコ国防省は今回の作戦にアメリカからの情報提供があったと発表しています。メキシコ政府はトランプ政権の圧力を受け、麻薬組織の取り締まりを強化しています。
Wow. Let's see. Will my game crash or will I crash?
メキシコ国防省は22日、中部
It's not this one. Auto dubbed? Ew, auto dubbed. That's Korean. Yeah, let's see what Korea says as well.
멕시코에서 가장 위험한 인물, 군 헬기까지 격추시켰던 멕시코 최대 마약 조직 CJNG의 수장 엘 멘초가 결국 사망했습니다. 멕시코 서부 타팔파에서 벌어진 이번 작전은 전쟁 영화를 방불케 했는데요. 장갑차와 로켓포가 동원된 격전 끝에 마약왕 엘 멘초는 체포 직후 숨졌습니다. 총격 후 부상 상태로 헬기를 통해 멕시코 시티로 긴급 이송되던 중 치명상으로 사망한 건데요. 정확한 총상 부위나 총알 개수는 공개되지 않았지만 격전 상황상 상반신 또는 치명 부위에 집중된 총격으로 추정됩니다. 멕시코가 이처럼 군대를 동원해 붙잡으려 했던 엘 멘초, 본명은 네메시오 루벤 오세게라입니다. 그리고 그는 특이한 이력이 있는데요. 1980년대 미국에서 마약 범죄로 추방된 뒤 멕시코에서 현직 경찰로 근무한 겁니다. 이후 범죄 조직에 합류한 뒤 2000년대 초 기존의 마약 조직인 밀레니오 카르텔이 붕괴된 틈을 타 잔존 세력을 모읍니다. 그렇게 탄생한 조직이 바로 멕시코 최대 마약 카르텔 중 하나인 CJNG, 일명 할리스코 신세대 카르텔입니다. 그리고 엘멘초는 이 조직의 최고 보스였죠. CJNG는 엘멘초의 지휘 아래 멕시코 최대 마약 밀매 조직 중 하나인 시날로아 카르텔과 경쟁할 정도로 급성장했습니다. 미국에서 유통되는 펜타닐과 기타 마약의 핵심 통로인 할리스코주를 주 근거지로 삼아 멕시코 정부군을 공격하는 파격 행보로 악명을 쌓아왔죠. 미국도 이 조직을 예의주시하며 엘멘초에 1,500만 달러, 한화로 216억 원의 현상금을 내걸었습니다. 하지만 군 헬기까지 격추시키며 엘멘초는 보란듯이 마약왕으로 악명을 떨쳤습니다. 그러다 지난 22일 멕시코 국방부의 타팔파 작전이 시작됩니다. 이 작전은 이전과는 확실히 달랐습니다. 과거에는 엘멘초가 먼저 움직이고 군이 포위망을 좁히며 체포 작전을 벌였습니다. 하지만 이번에는 멕시코 국방부, 정보기관, 연방검찰이 함께 엘멘초의 정확한 위치를 정밀하게 추적했습니다. 이후 육군 특수부대와 공군 등이 동시에 투입된 공조작전으로 그의 은신처를 포위했습니다. 엘멘초 측은 장갑차와 로켓 발사기까지 동원해 맞섰지만 탈출로는 열지 못했습니다. 여기에 미국이 CJNG를 테러 조직으로 지정하고 멕시코 정부를 압박하면서 멕시코 정부가 전에 없는 부담을 느낀 것도 엘멘초 체포에 성공한 요인으로 꼽힙니다. 엘멘초 사망은 곧바로 멕시코 전역을 뒤흔들었습니다. 관광도시 푸에르토 바야르타 상공에 연기가 피어오르고 공항에선 사람들이 뛰어다니는 영상이 잇따라 엿보입니다. 엘멘초 사살 소식 이후 마약 조직원들은 할리스코와 인근 여러 주에서 차량을 불태우고 도로를 봉쇄하는 방식으로 보복성 공격을 감행했습니다. 특히 주목되는 건 이번 작전의 무대가 2025 북중미 월드컵을 앞둔 도시라는 점입니다. 할리스코주의 주도인 과달라하라는 올여름 한국 대표팀 경기를 포함한 월드컵 경기가 열릴 예정입니다. 체포작전이 벌어진 타팔파는 과달라하라와 자동차로 2시간 거리입니다. 월드컵을 불과 몇 달 앞두고 전 세계가 주목하는 곳에서 살벌한 엘멘초 체포작전이 벌어진 겁니다. 이번 체포작전은 멕시코 클라우디아 세인바운 대통령의 공약이기도 했는데요. 엘멘초 사망 이후 앞으로 멕시코 마약 조직이 또 다른 권력 투쟁에 휘말릴 수 있다는 관측도 나옵니다. 지금까지 백주희였습니다.
Wow. I have another one. I feel like there's more Korean reports than in Japan reports.
Esto es Ixtapa. Vamos, vamos, vamos.
There's no report, it's just footage playing over. Let's see. We don't watch this one yet. Okay.
メキシコ政府は22日、中西部ハリスコ州で行われたメキシコ軍による作戦で、国内最大規模の麻薬密売組織ハリスコ新世代カルテルの最高幹部、通称エル・メンチョを殺害したと発表しました。ロイター通信によりますと、作戦後、組織のメンバーが市街地で車両に火をつけて道路を封鎖したほか、銃撃も起きるなど混乱が広がりました。民間人の被害の有無は分かっていません。ハリスコ新世代カルテルはフェンタニルなどの薬物をアメリカに密輸しているとされていて、トランプ政権が去年2月に外国テロ組織に指定。メキシコ軍は今回の作戦でアメリカ側からの情報提供があったと発表しています。一方、ニューヨーク・タイムズの記者は関係者の話として、 今年6月のワールドカップ開催を前にアメリカ側からエルメンチョ拘束の圧力があったと伝えています。
Wow, the DEA? Drug bust. Pink. This one's in pink. Japan.
メキシコ最大規模の麻薬組織ハリスコ新世代カルテルの最高幹部ネメシオ・オセゲラ氏は22日軍の作戦で殺害されました。この組織はフェンタニルなどの薬物をアメリカに密輸しているとされていてトランプ政権が外国テロ組織に指定しています。オセゲラ氏の殺害を受けメキシコ国内では麻薬組織側による報復で車両放火や襲撃が相次いでいます。メキシコ政府は23日一連の攻撃で市民1人が死亡し国家警備隊の隊員ら27人も死亡したと発表しました。また麻薬組織側の構成員30人も死亡したとしています。南部では23日スクールバスが燃やされるなどして複数の州で学校が休校となったほか航空便が欠航となって観光客らが足止めされるなど混乱が続いています。
Okay. Oh, it is. It is related to that.
普段はオーシャンブルーの海岸線が広がるメキシコ屈指のリゾート地がまるで戦時下のような光景に。
Look at even way out by the airport. The airport is closed. Downtown is closed. Businesses are closed. This is the Mexican cartel's retaliation on Puerto Vallarta.
momentos bastante complicados. 空港には逃げ惑う人々の姿。銃撃を避けるかのようにしゃがみ込む人々もいます。トップを殺害された麻薬組織の報復は一瞬で市民をパニックに陥れるほどでした。メキシコ第2の都市グアダラハラ。4ヶ月後にはワールドカップ会場の一つになる街がテロの恐怖
クワダラハラクワダラハラ
に行ったメキシコ第2の都市グアダラハラ。
グワ
4ヶ月後にはワールドカップ会場の一つになる街がテロの恐怖にさらされました。街の一角で捉えられた映像です。ガソリンスタンドに乗り付けた白い車から銃を手にした男たちが出てきて従業員たちを排除。男たちはガソリンをまき散らし火をつけると同時に逃げていきます。車にも火がつけられています。大型量販店の駐車場では10台以上の車が火をつけられたようです。メキシコ32州のうち少なくとも20州で車や店などへの放火が行われたとみられています。きっかけはメキシコ最大級の麻薬カルテルのリーダー通称エルメンチョがメキシコ軍の作戦で拘束され移送中に死んだことでした。この組織アメリカなどへのコカインやフェンタニルの密輸で急成長したグループとされ勢力範囲もメキシコ各地に及んでいます。そのリーダーが殺害されたことで構成員たちが各地で蜂起に出たと言われています。空港から一斉退避する人々。報復が市民にも向けられるのではとの懸念からですがカルテルが市民を標的にすることはありませんでした。しかし恐怖を植え付けるには十分です。
Pues mira, ahorita toda la gente estamos asustados. Nadie queremos salir. Ahorita casi nada más para lo más necesario.
And today was the first day as we left the hotel to go have breakfast and saw all the craziness going on and the violence and the smoke that we were actually terrified. And we saw the people running down the streets, running from the flames and stuff and the fire. And we ran back to the hotel, and then that's when they got the shelter in order place, and we've been here all day.
今回のカルテルへの攻撃、トランプ大統領と無関係ではありません。トランプ政権はアメリカに大量の麻薬を送り込んでいるとして、このカルテルを外国テロ組織に指定し、$1,500万という莫大な懸賞金をリーダーにかけていました。
$15 million
加えて
bounty.
こうしたカルテルを取り締まれないメキシコ政府を猛批判
That's a high
し、
bounty.
追加関税をかけ、メキシコへの武力介入すら示唆してきた背景があります。
You have to do something with Mexico. Mexico has to get their act together because they're pouring through Mexico, and we're going to have to do something. We love Mexico to do it. They're capable of doing it, but unfortunately, the cartels are very strong in Mexico.
今回の作戦には先月立ち上げたばかりの両国合同のチームが暗躍したと言われています。ワールドカップが近づく中で目に見える成果を急いだのかもしれません。
3 hours. 3-hour podcast. Who's this by? USA.
はい、2月の23日祝日ですよね、皆さんこんばんは、あなたの知らないアメリカニュースジャック菊間がお送りします、ちょっと祝日政府が自国すら守れないということを示してますよね。だってあんなに一気に瞬間的に街がタップで
The FBI leader.
に彼のこと事態宣言、じゃあ中国はノーされるテロね、それからメタフェタミンなんかもうエルパンチョ率いるですね CJNG っていうのは本当やばいわけで、
裏社会タイムスです、今回は緊急で動画を回しておりますと初めて言える感じですかね。はい。というのもですね、まあ今現在まさに起きていることをちょっと解説したいなと思っております。メキシコで、麻薬組織がこうやってトップも俺たち倒してるよってしないとこの軍隊の指揮や予算を含めて国のイメージとかも含めて維持できないんで常に倒したりしなきゃいけないんです。そうするとこの報復活動無限連鎖が続いている中の一個なんですよこれが。
だから首を落としても復活するものある意味呪いみたいなものをやってんだけど
構造システムですね。麻薬カルテルという構造が今は支配しているので
その同地域にですねリゾートやホテルに閉じ込められている状態だったんですよ現状は。で
Breaking news. Oh no, they're a crypto. Crypto, that's their name. What is this, a podcast? Oh, where's my... Here, this one will work. Yes. Wait, there's another pink one? There's 2 pink ones. Okay. Good chat, good chat.
メキシコ政府は22日、中西部ハリスコ州で行われた軍の作戦で、国内最大規模の麻薬組織、ハリスコ新世代
Mencho. That's his name. Eru. Mexico.
カルテルの政府は
What's up?
メキシコ政府は22日、中西部ハリスコ州で行われた軍の作戦で、国内最大規模の麻薬組織、ハリスコ新世代カルテルの最高幹部、ネメシオ・オセゲラ氏を殺害したと発表しました。オセゲラ氏の殺害を受け、メキシコ国内では、武装集団による高速道路の封鎖や車両への放火などが相次ぎ、緊張が高まっています。この麻薬組織は、フェンタニルなどの薬物をアメリカに密輸しているとされていて、トランプ政権が去年2月、外国テロ組織に指定していました。アメリカ国務省は、オセゲラ氏に最大1500万ドル、日本円でおよそ23億円の報奨金をかけ行方を追っていて、メキシコ政府はアメリカ側からの情報提供があり、今回の作戦に至ったと説明しています。
Cool. This one different. That's different, but I think it's just a compilation of footage. The podcast, New York Post, but in Japanese. I'm guessing that's a compilation. Where's my VPN? Uh-oh. Kira Kira USA.
皆さんこんにちは。キラキラ USA のママです。今日の動画は1月に公開したカンクン動画その後です。私たちが帰国した後、親父と相馬は2人だけでさらにメキシコに2泊してきたので、その様子をお届け。それでは家族とバイバイし2人で旅立つところから動画スタートです。はい、ここからパパと相馬はウーバーでレンタカーに移動して2泊。ちょうどいい。カリカリお外が。どうだった相馬？
とてもいい思い出です。
なんか。
What's the sad part? What is this?
メキシコのシェインバウム大統領はアメリカのトランプ大統領から麻薬密売対策のためにアメリカ軍によるメキシコ国内での軍事行動を提案されたものの、これを断ったと明らかにしました。シェインバウム大統領は12日、トランプ大統領と電話会談し、その中で麻薬の密売を減らすためにアメリカ軍がメキシコ国内で軍事行動を行う申し出があったことを明らかにしました。これに対しシェインバウム氏は申し出を断った上で、麻薬密売対策などでいい話し合いができたと述べ、主権の枠組みの中で協力を続けていく、従属的な関係ではなく協力関係を望んでいると強調しました。またメキシコからアメリカへの合成麻薬フェンタニルの密輸はここ1年で半減したと指摘しました。
Aha! Oh no, I streamed one day ago. The whole thing. Okay, actually, yeah, let's put this on. These are captions.
Pues ahora sí que la ciudadanía ya.
Ah.
周日，我们知道墨西哥政府是发动了突袭，击毙了著名的毒枭内梅西奥·奥塞格拉，但是立即引发了他的团伙成员在墨西哥多地掀起的暴力报复浪潮。美国敦促在墨西哥的美国人就地避难。我们首先请记者张亮来和我们介绍一下这起事件的具体情况。张亮，
你好，扶摇。墨西哥周日表示呢，绰号为阿尔门桥的墨西哥毒枭内梅西奥·艾塞格拉呢，在一次军事突袭中呢被击毙。 奥塞格拉的死引发其所在的犯罪团伙在墨西哥多个州展开暴力行动，导致多家航空公司暂停部分航班。美国驻墨西哥使领馆呢，向墨西哥部分地区的美国公民呢发出了就地避难的警报。那最近几个月呢，在川普政府的施压下，墨西哥政府加大了对贩毒集团的打击力度。墨西哥的国防部称呢，奥塞格拉在西部哈利斯科的州的一次枪战中身负重伤，在被空运到墨西哥城的途中死亡。那墨西哥的国防部指出呢，一支由美国领导、专门负责贩毒集团情报收集的美国的特遣部队呢，在周日的墨西哥军方的突袭行动中呢，发挥了作用。在奥塞格拉被击毙后呢，其所带领的犯罪团伙在墨西哥多地呢，掀起了暴力的浪潮。有超过6个州出现车辆被焚毁、持枪歹徒封堵高速公路等情况。哈里斯克州的州长呢巴博罗纳瓦诺随后敦促呢居民待在家中，直到局势呢得到控制。美国的大使馆呢也建议美国公民呢就地避难。美国驻墨西哥使领馆呢在其网站上发出警告说，由于持续的安全行动和各种暴力犯罪活动，以下地区的美国公民呢应该就地避难，直到另行通知。这些地区呢包括哈利斯科州的巴亚尔塔港、查帕拉和瓜拉拉哈拉、塔毛利帕斯州的和雷萨诺等地、米切肯州、格雷罗州以及呢新莱昂州。美国政府呢敦促这些地区的美国公民呢避开执法活动区域，注意周围的环境，寻找掩体呢，并尽量减少不必要的出门，并关注呢当地媒体的最新消息，听从当地政府的指示，遇到紧急情况呢拨打911，避开人群，通过电话、短信和社交媒体呢告知家人和朋友自己的位置和安危。那美国副国务卿克里斯托弗兰道表示，奥塞格拉的死呢，对美国、墨西哥以及整个拉丁美洲来说呢，是一个重大的进展。这些贩毒集团呢，每年向美国走私价值数十亿美元的可卡因和芬太尼。扶摇，
好的，谢谢张亮。那么秦鹏先生，您怎么看目前美军这次又和墨西哥一起，美军是提供了很多的情报给墨西哥去逮捕这样的一个毒枭。刚才呢，我们的华府记者张亮和我们介绍过，现在墨西哥最大的毒枭已经被逮捕，但是同时墨西哥也是面临着一些这样的暴乱的行动，因为这个毒枭他的很多的团伙正在给出一些报复行动，比如说去燃烧这个当地的 Costco 之类的。所以说，目前美军逮捕马杜罗那样子是快刀斩乱麻，而墨西哥没有给出这样的一个雷霆行动。所以说，您怎么预计这件事情的发展，美军会更多的参与其中吗？
对这个事情，现在确实在墨西哥引起了非常大的一个震动，因为我们知道呢，说这个马杜罗和墨西哥这个毒枭，它的这个组织形式其实是很不一样的。马杜罗呢，他其实主要是个人的权威，他个人消失之后，那么其他的人被美国政府进行这种威慑或者是收买，那么他们实际上是愿意呢，为了保命保财，在配合美国在做这个国家的转型和国家的稳定，所以这个是我们看到的在委内瑞拉发生的。但是呢，在墨西哥其实很不一样。墨西哥的这个毒枭呢，其实还不仅仅是被抓，这次是被击毙了。被击毙之后，我们看到他们这样的一个毒枭组织呢，就开始进行报复。这实际上也是这种黑帮性质的组织它的一个特点，就是呢，它有一个这种威慑的一个逻辑，认为说如果不进行报复，那么它呢就会进行这种权威崩塌，那么它以后在做事情就很难再做了，所以呢，它必须进行这种强烈的一个报复。这个在历史上也发生过类似的这些事情。那么这样一个组织呢，它和马杜罗政府有一个非常大的不同，它其实是一个包含着自己这种军队甚至是特警队的这样的一个庞大的组织，它的整个的武装的人数可能是超过了35000人。而且呢，它实际上是渗透进了政府，进行了警察，甚至是军队，是这么一个非常特殊的这样的一个机构。他们呢，而且还有这个贩卖人口，这个和地方的这种势力的勾结，以及很多的这些经济的活动，所以他们是这样的。所以呢， 它的这个存在的形式和马杜罗那边就非常大的不同。他必须通过这种恐怖行动来去维护他的利益，维护他现有的这个就是贩毒的一种权利。因为目前来讲呢，除了这个毒枭组织，它呢还有其他的这些毒枭组织，所以呢，在这种关键的时候，如果他们不进行强硬报复，那很可能也会被呢其他组织趁机去抢夺地盘。所以这个我们就看到，他现在在很多州在进行焚烧车辆啊，封锁高速公路，摧毁商业设施，甚至呢是占领机场等等这样的一些事情。它的目的其实就是在进行制造混乱，威慑当局。所以在可以预见的未来的这个时间内，短期内我认为呢，它的这个报复还会持续和甚至进行这个升级。那对于这个墨西哥政府来讲，它其实也很地方政府引起一个权力真空，涌入的这些非法移民涌入边境涌入的这样一些冲突，对吧？那么在美国内部呢，也引起了很大的一个这种争议，甚至是反对，认为它呢是不够人道，对吧？
Actually, there's no audio for that. Mix. Okay, maybe this one will be better. Yes. We'll do this. I don't need some.
Объединенная межведомственная оперативная группа США по борьбе с наркокартелями сыграла роль в ликвидации главы картеля «Новое поколение Халиско» Немесио Рубина Осегеры Сервантеса, известного как Эль Менчо. Эта группировка считается одной из самых мощных и жестоких преступных организаций в Мексике и долгое время входила в число приоритетных целей как мексиканских, так и американских силовых структур. По данным Reuters со ссылкой на источник в Пентагоне, американская сторона предоставила мексиканским военным разведывательную информацию, которая помогла установить местонахождение лидера картеля. Группа, созданная в январе, занимается сбором и анализом.
Ликвидация наркобарона вызвала кровавый хаос в Мексике. По последним данным, погибли уже не менее 25 человек, в основном служащие федеральных и местных сил безопасности. Среди жертв расстрелянная беременная женщина. Беспорядки вспыхнули с поджогами авто, магазинов и банков. В яростных перестрелках уничтожены до 30 головорезов из картеля. Задержаны 3 десятка подозреваемых. Подробности операции в материале Никиты Махоткина.
Мексика в хаосе. Страна превратилась в огнище. Ликвидирован один из самых могущественных наркобаронов мира – Немесио Рубен Осегерра Сервантес, известный как Эль Менчо, лидер картеля «Халиско. Новое поколение». Местные спецподразделения армии, получив разведданные США, провели рейд на укрытие преступного лидера. В ходе ожесточенной перестрелки Осегерра Сервантес получил тяжелые ранения. Его пытались транспортировать в Мехико, он скончался по дороге. Последователи и подшефные Эль Менчо мгновенно взялись за возмездие. Картель развернул беспорядки по всей стране. В настоящий момент хаос посеян в более чем 2 десятках штатов из 32, составляющих Мексику. Криминальная карьера Осегера Сервантеса стартовала в 80-х, когда он нелегально эмигрировал в США и занялся торговлей наркотиками. Его неоднократно арестовывали. В начале 90-х депортировали в Мексику. Вернувшись, он поступил на службу в полицию, но вскоре вернулся к преступной деятельности. В конце нулевых основал Халиско новое поколение. Картель быстро вырос в одну из самых жестоких и мощных группировок страны. Он прославился своими зверствами. В 2015 году члены нового поколения сбили военный вертолет. Группировка превосходила полицию в вооружении, использовала контрабандное оружие, включая пулеметы и гранатометы. Ежегодно от их рук погибали тысячи человек. В последнее время члены нового поколения стали активно применять дроны с взрывчаткой для атак на конкурентов и правоохранителей. Одна из ключевых сфер деятельности картеля – торговля наркотиками, с зоной их распространения в более чем 40 стран. За информацию о местонахождении Эль Менчо США предлагали вознаграждение в $15 миллионов. Его считали одним из главных поставщиков синтетических опиоидов в Америку. При штурме убежища Осегера Сервантеса, по разным данным, погибло от 4 до 7 членов картеля. Реакцией преступной группировки оказалось объявление властям войны. Массовые разбои, блокады, поджоги. Есть жертвы среди силовиков и гражданских. Их число растет с каждым часом. Текущие беспорядки – один из самых сильных всплесков насилия в Мексике за последние годы. Тысячи туристов оказались заложниками отелей. Им, как и местным жителям, рекомендовано не покидать помещение.
И самое важное сейчас – гарантировать мир и безопасность всему населению всей Мексики. И именно этим мы занимаемся.
Некоторые эксперты утверждены во мнении, что напряженность в Мексике может усилиться из-за вероятной борьбы за власть в картеле. Группировка разделится на части, и тогда количество очагов насилия кратно возрастет. Никита Махоткин, Дмитрий Астертах, Первый информационный.
Durante más de 30 años fue una sombra, objetivo prioritario para México y Estados Unidos, líder del cártel más expansivo del país, un hombre que había evadido operativos, cercos y persecuciones durante décadas, y al final, lo que ningún operativo de inteligencia había logrado en 30 años, lo abrió una visita.
Todo lo que se refiere a la pareja sentimental, a sus colaboradores, a su círculo cercano, eso es con inteligencia militar de nosotros. Hubo, insisto, mucha información adicional, muy importante, que nos dio Estados Unidos, pero que todo eso ya integrado y bien analizado nos pudo dar la localización exacta. Pero la primera parte de la pareja sentimental y de su círculo cercano y demás, ese es producto de inteligencia del personal militar.
Hoy sabemos exactamente cómo cayó el Mencho, y la historia es más precisa, más paciente y más reveladora de lo que cualquiera imaginaba. Todo comenzó el 20 de febrero. Trabajos de inteligencia militar central detectaron a un hombre de confianza de una de las parejas sentimentales de Oseguera Cervantes. Ese contacto, ese eslabón aparentemente menor, trasladó a la mujer a un complejo de cabañas en Tapalpa y ahí, según confirmó el propio secretario de Defensa, el general Ricardo Trevilla, se reunió con el Mencho. Hasta ahí, una visita, una relación, un momento privado en medio de la sierra jalisciense.
Mediante trabajos de inteligencia militar central, se ubicó a un hombre de confianza de una de las parejas sentimentales del Mencho, que la trasladó a una instalación en el poblado de Tapalpa, Jalisco. En ese lugar se reunió con el Mencho, esta pareja sentimental, y el 21 de febrero se retira del inmueble y se obtuvo información que el Mencho permanecía en ese lugar.
Y esa fue la señal que el ejército estaba esperando. Con la confirmación de que el objetivo seguía en el lugar, fuerzas especiales del Ejército y la Fuerza de Reacción Inmediata de la Guardia Nacional montaron el operativo. 3 componentes: fuerza terrestre, unidad aeromóvil con 6 helicópteros y respaldo aéreo. Todo bajo 3 principios básicos de doctrina militar: secreto, sorpresa e iniciativa. La noche del 22 de febrero avanzaron. No hubo rendición. El círculo de seguridad de El Mencho abrió fuego con violencia extrema. 8 sicarios cayeron. Se aseguró un arsenal que incluía lanzacohetes tipo RPG, el mismo tipo de arma usada en 2015 para derribar un helicóptero de la Fuerza Aérea. El Mencho intentó huir hacia una zona boscosa. Las fuerzas especiales lo persiguieron. Hubo un segundo enfrentamiento. Un helicóptero fue alcanzado y tuvo que aterrizar de emergencia. Pero el cerco no se abrió. Oseguera Cervantes resultó herido junto con 2 escoltas. Fue detenido. Lo subieron a un helicóptero para evacuarlo, y durante ese traslado murió. Así cayó el hombre más buscado de México. No por una traición, no por un error táctico, por una rendija humana en su blindaje, una visita, una confianza, una pista seguida con paciencia durante años. El general Trevilla lo dejó claro. Todo el seguimiento al círculo íntimo, a la pareja, a los colaboradores, fue inteligencia militar mexicana. Sin matices, sin excusas. 30 años evadiendo al Estado. Y al final, lo que lo ubicó fue lo más humano que existe. La necesidad de ver a alguien de confianza.
The threat of terrorism by religious and political extremists on societies throughout the world is creating a new global landscape, where victory is not always measured by deploying superior forces onto a traditional battlefield. For America, the weapon of choice employed against this threat to international stability is a classified U.S. military force known as Special Operations Command, or SOCOM. SOCOM is, in effect, a separate branch of the armed forces, with 44,000 Special Operations Commandos drawn from the Army, Air Force, and Navy.
Yeah, direct hits right there.
The SOCOM mission is unconventional warfare, a concept involving the strategic use of American military special operations against narco-terrorist and state-sponsored terrorism. 2 of the most renowned units in the special operations community are the U.S. Navy SEALs and the U.S. Army Special Forces, known as the Green Berets. Identified by their professional reputation for aggression, these secret soldiers operate in a severe and classified environment, requiring a commitment and expertise beyond the scale of traditional combat missions. The war on terror is a byproduct of the political tensions of the 21st century. For America's secret soldiers, who are currently deployed worldwide under the auspices of the Department of Defense and the National Security Council, modern battlefields can be about enforcing the peace as much as waging war.
Now clear to engage the moving vehicle.
Afghanistan is a country the size of Texas, with over 20 million inhabitants. Bagram Air Base, 30 miles outside the capital city of Kabul, is the main staging area for Operation Enduring Freedom, a U.S.-led allied coalition in the war on terror. From here and smaller bases in the south, military operations search for remnants of the defeated Taliban and Al-Qaeda network in the first special operations-led war ever conducted by the United States.
We're not fighting artillery, we're not fighting tanks, we're not fighting face-to-face with an enemy. We're fighting with an enemy that is established here and they're able to hide among the population.
Clusters of abandoned or destroyed mud brick houses stand silent. Wrecked vehicles litter the trails. Afghanistan is a land virtually destroyed after 25 years of war. To operate effectively here, U.S. Special Forces must depend on the cooperation of the local population.
They know their way around this whole area. So we can just say, hey, we need to go right here. And they'll say, okay, well, you can't go this way because there's mines. You can't go this way because the mountains are high and the Mujahideen always used to ambush people here. This is the best route.
Working with indigenous Afghan militia units of up to 120 strong, small teams of Special Forces commandos operate throughout Afghanistan. In this hostile terrain, American and Allied forces regularly come under fire.
You got danger everywhere you look. You got to keep your wits about you. Just because people aren't dying, people may think that this war is over. It's not.
It's never 100% safe. I'm down here wearing body armor, carrying 2 guns. So, I mean, anything could happen. You got a lot of people traveling through here, some major thoroughfare coming from and going to Pakistan. At any given time, somebody can drive by in one of these trucks and drop a grenade out the window. It happened just the other day.
With the Taliban defeated, Afghanistan is essentially ruled by a collection of rival tribal warlords and warring ethnic groups. Here at a fire base named Camp Harriman near Orgun, Special Forces adapt themselves to that reality.
Wow, I went. It's just another term for politician. The same thing that happens in politics across the world is happening here. You've got people who are in it for themselves, and you've got people who are in it for the team. You have to keep in mind what the
Why is this in Japanese?
Durante más de 30 años fue una sombra, objetivo prioritario para México y Estados Unidos. Líder.
Ликвидация наркобарона вызвала кровавый хаос в...
Kono ken koso.
Объединенная межведомственная оперативная группа США по борьбе с наркокартелями сыграла роль в ликвидации главы картеля «Новое поколение Халиско» Немесио Рубина Осегеры Сервантеса, известного как Эль Менчо. Эта группировка считается одной из самых мощных и жестоких преступных организаций в Мексике и долгое время входила в число приоритетных целей как мексиканских, так и американских силовых структур. По данным Reuters со ссылкой на источник в Пентагоне, американская сторона предоставила мексиканским военным разведывательную информацию, которая помогла установить местонахождение лидера картеля. Группа, созданная в январе, занимается сбором и анализом данных о структуре и логистике наркокартелей, а также картографированием их сетей по обе стороны американо-мексиканской границы. В ее задачи входит координация усилий различных ведомств США в борьбе с транснациональной преступностью. Бывший высокопоставленный сотрудник управления по борьбе с наркотиками Джек Райли отметил, что расширение участия военных в подобных операциях способствовало решению президента США Дональда Трампа включить мексиканские картели в список террористических организаций. По его словам, это позволило задействовать дополнительные ресурсы и механизмы межведомственного взаимодействия. В то же время власти Мексики подчеркнули, что операция была полностью спланирована и проведена национальными спецслужбами без физического участия американских военных. Посольство Мексики в США заявило, что Соединенные Штаты предоставили лишь дополнительную разведывательную информацию, а сообщение о прямом участии американских сил не соответствует действительности. В Мехико особо отметили, что суверенитет страны при проведении операции не нарушался. Ликвидация Эль Менчо спровоцировала масштабную волну насилия. По данным газеты «Эль Универсал», беспорядки охватили как минимум 8 штатов, включая Халиско, Мичоакан, Колиму и Гуанахуато. Боевики перекрывают автотрассы, поджигают автомобили и грузовики. В ряде регионов зафиксированы перестрелки и нападения на объекты инфраструктуры. Напряженная ситуация сложилась и в аэропорту Гвадалахары, где пассажирам временно запрещали покидать самолеты на фоне беспорядков и сильного задымления в окрестностях.
I think it's because I have 3 monitors set up right now.
Волна насилия, беспорядков и поджогов охватила Мексику. Члены картеля мстят мексиканским властям за захват и убийство Немесио Осегеры Сервантеса, также известного как Эль Менчо. Он был лидером крупнейшего наркокартеля Мексики. За информацию, которая привела бы к его аресту, была объявлена награда в $15 миллионов США. Власти Мексики заявляют, что он был тяжело ранен во время военного рейда в штате Халиско и скончался по дороге в больницу. После этого вооруженные люди стали поджигать автомобили и магазины сначала в Халиско, а затем беспорядки охватили и другие штаты, в том числе и Оахаку.
Мы найдем виновных в этих беспорядках. Такие противоправные действия недопустимы ни со стороны государства, ни со стороны силовых структур.
В нескольких штатах были перекрыты автомагистрали. Жителям некоторых городов рекомендовали не выходить из домов. В школах отменили занятия. Мы все сейчас боимся. Выходим на улицу только в случае крайней необходимости. Потому что не знаем, выходить, не выходить, что нам делать. Десятки рейсов из США и Канады в Мексику были отменены. В аэропорту Гвадалахары, столицы штата Халиско, где задержали наркобарона, началась паника. Власти утверждают, что ситуация под контролем.
Самое главное сейчас – гарантировать мир и безопасность всех жителей Мексики. И мы это делаем. Сегодня все уже успокоилось. Правительство, вооруженные силы и штаб по безопасности контролируют ситуацию.
Сообщается, что в операции
Here, let's listen to a little bit of Latin Cyrillic.
The situation in Mexico.
Ситуация в Мексике остается крайне напряженной. К этому часу известно минимум от 30...
Did you hear that? Did you hear how terrible that sounded? Before I fixed it.
Ситуация в Мексике остается крайне напряженной. К этому часу известно минимум от 30 погибших в результате столкновений с боевиками. Основные потери пришлись на силовиков, которые подверглись публичным казням.
Беспорядки спровоцировало убийство главы крупнейшего в Мексике наркокартеля «Новое поколение Халиско» по кличке Эль Менчо. Его банда, одна из самых жестоких в мире, теперь мстит за смерть своего хозяина.
Эпицентром разбоя стал штат Халиско, но погромы быстро перекинулись на соседние регионы. В 9 штатах введен режим чрезвычайной ситуации. Картели поджигают предприятия и призывают поджигать предприятия и рушить инфраструктуру. За день вооруженные бандиты сожгли десятки машин, отделений банков, магазинов и заправок.
Есть данные о нападениях на тюрьмы, в результате чего сотни преступников оказались на свободе. В 20 городах закрыты школы, остановлен общественный транспорт. В аэропортах по всей стране отменяют рейсы. Посольства разных стран, включая Россию, призвали своих граждан не посещать штат Халиско, а тем, кто там находится, оставаться в укрытиях.
Ситуация страшная и критическая. Нам рекомендовали оставаться в безопасных местах, не выходить на улицы, не пользоваться такси и не ехать в аэропорт. Пляжи закрывают, люди стараются скорее уйти в помещение. Я слышал ранее, что Трамп собирается бороться с наркокартелями в Мексике. Неужели это начало?
Пока же силовикам удалось ликвидировать 27 нападавших боевиков, власти заявляют, что ситуация под контролем, однако вскоре может стать еще более взрывоопасной. Картели убитого Эль Менчо десятилетиями управляли целыми районами, раздавали еду, лекарства, заменяя государство. Теперь этот порядок сломан, поэтому уже завтра боевики могут начать драться друг с другом за место под солнцем.
Устранение лидера лишь временно ослабит один картель, так как на смену ему придут новые лидеры. До этого они будут конфликтовать между собой. Правительство быстро подавит эти беспорядки, чтобы защитить туристические зоны. После этого насилие переместится в сельскую местность, где производят фентанил и переправляют мигрантов. Это именно то, что следует бояться властям Мексики, потому что штаты следят за картелями.
Хотя операцию по ликвидации Эль-Менчо формально провели мексиканские военные, ключевую роль сыграла разведка США. В Белом доме подтвердили, что именно она помогла выйти на след наркобарона, чью голову Госдеп ранее оценил в $15 миллионов. Этот эпизод подтвердил заявление Трампа о том, что США намерены бороться с наркотрафиком из Латинской Америки.
Сейчас же Вашингтон как бы дает шанс Мексике навести порядок самостоятельно, но при этом контролирует ситуацию не хуже местных властей. Мол, если Мехико не начнет видимую для Госдепа ликвидацию картелей, то следующим шагом вполне может стать вторжение американских войск.
Wow. Wonder what all that means.
О том, что в мексиканском городе Тапальма на западе страны военные ликвидировали главаря одного из самых жестоких и мощных преступных синдикатов, новое поколение Халиско, известного под прозвищем Эль Менчо, уже знают многие. Да, он скончался от полученных ранений во время воздушной транспортировки после спецоперации, которую поддержали разведданные США. Но многие ли увидели в происшедшем логичное продолжение политики нынешней администрации Белого дома по очистке всего американского региона от, скажем так, всяких нехороших людей или просто дестабилизирующего элемента? Давайте разбираться в вопросе. Под руководством Эль Менчо картель в Мексике вырос из региональной банды в широкую сеть преступной деятельности, контролируя крупные маршруты поставок наркотиков, в частности синтетического фентанила в Соединенные Штаты. Размеры и влияние организации были настолько велики, что в разное время количество ее членов оценивали десятками тысяч, а операции охватывали множество штатов Мексики от западного побережья до границы с южными штатами США. Сам Эль Менчо находился в числе самых разыскиваемых наркобаронов Америки. За информацию о нем власти США обещали крупное вознаграждение, а картель, которым он руководил, признан одним из самых опасных и могущественных. Получается, что прав был Дональд Трамп, когда говорил, что из Мексики в США в основном проходят в виде нелегальных мигрантов преступники. Ликвидация такого преступного лидера, несомненно, удача для всех, кто борется с транснациональной преступностью. Однако сразу после его смерти в 8 штатах Мексики вспыхнула волна насилия. Боевики поджигали автомобили, блокировали дороги, вступали в перестрелки с силовиками. Это продемонстрировало, что картель – это не человек, а сложная сеть влияния и контроля, способная дестабилизировать ситуацию в такой большой и многочисленной стране, как Мексика. Эти события четко показывают, преступная активность давно вышла за рамки внутренних мексиканских проблем и оплела паутиной и США. Наркокартели действуют как самостоятельные армии с военизированной подготовкой, техникой, оружием и готовностью сражаться с государственными силами. Попытки правительства Мексики справиться с таким вызовом в одиночку приводят к вспышкам жестокости и росту жертв среди мирного населения. То есть жестокая реакция со стороны преступных элементов на убийство Эль Менчо доказала, что силовых структур только одной страны для такой борьбы явно недостаточно. Реальный контроль над такими организациями возможен только через координацию усилий нескольких государств, в первую очередь Соединенных Штатов и их латиноамериканских партнеров. Именно такая международная кооперация в борьбе с наркотрафиком и стала одной из ключевых задач администрации Дональда Трампа. С момента появления картеля «Новое поколение Халиско» его влияние неуклонно росло. Он не только поставлял наркотики, но и создавал внутренние структуры власти, влияя на экономику, правоохранительные органы и даже социальные сферы не только в Мексике, но и в латиноамериканском регионе. Такая масштабная преступная организация давно перестала быть просто мексиканской проблемой.
Јапонија ја погоди земјотрес со магнитуда 6,7 со епицентар во близина на префектурата Аомори. Издадено е предупредување за цунами до 1 метар за Хокаидо, Аомори, Ивате и Мијаги. За сега е забележано само мало цунами од околу 20 см и нема штети или повредени. Потресот доаѓа само 4 дена по разорниот земјотрес од 7,5 степени во истата област, а властите предупредуваат на можни нови силни земјотреси во следните денови.
That's it? What is all these languages in there?
Силен земјотрес од 6,7 степени по Рихтер го погоди јапонскиот остров Хокаидо на северот од земјата. Медиумите јавуваат за 9 жртви, над 150 повредени, а 40 неисчезнати. Потресот предизвика одрони, поради што бројни куќи се затрупани со земја. Снимките од воздух покажуваат штети од огромни размери, предизвикани од лизгањето на земјиштето. Без струја се 3 милиони жители, а најголемиот дел од нив се од престолнината Сапоро, во чија близина е и епицентарот на земјотресот. И нуклеарната централа Томари, која се наоѓа на островот, остана без струја, но засега нема забележан пораст на радиоактивноста. Пожар избил и во петрохемискиот комплекс Мурорану, но брзо бил изгасен. Откажани се 200 авионски летови, што директно погоди околу 40.000 патници. Премиерот Шинзо Абе соопшти дека владата веќе формирала кризен штаб за координација во спасувањето и помошта. Најави дека 25.000 војници ќе бидат испратени на погоденото подрачје за да помогнат во спасувањето. Ова е прв земјотрес од 1996 на островот Хокаидо, кој е посилен од 6 единици по Рихтер. Властите предупредуваат за авторшокови до крајот на неделата и апелираат до граѓаните да бидат внимателни. Од метеоролошката агенција велат дека по вакви силни земјотреси обично по 3 дена се очекуваат и други потреси со сличен интензитет. Овој земјотрес следува по силниот тајфун кој ја погоди земјата и уби 10 луѓе, а 340 се повредени. Јапонија е едно од најактивните сеизмички подрачја во светот со околу 20% од земјотресите кои се посилни од 6 Рихтерови степени.
Ouch. Alright, let's see how my YouTube homepage. My color enjoy the war. Whoa, socioeconomic. Yeah, the end of personal computers is coming. Okay, here, I'm gonna pause for right now and then we'll come back to this later. Oops, I missed it, whatever. Ew, Grant. Okay, end stream.